Thanks, everybody. Great to be here this afternoon. I'll try to make it somewhat lively because I know we're deep into the agenda. My name is Briana Kobor. I'm the head of energy market innovation at Google, where I work to supply our growing footprint of data centers with clean, reliable, and affordable electricity. So to start out with, just to level set, why does Google use a lot of energy? So I'm sure that folks have seen a lot of the headlines, and I know I've only been in here for the last panel, but a lot of mention about the growth from data centers as well. So I'd like to see by a show of hands, how many of you have taken out your phone and accessed your email or your news feed during today's panels? Okay, and now be honest, how many of you were doing that right when I asked that question? So thank you for being active data center users. The growth we're seeing in data center demand is really an aggregation of the digital services that we all increasingly rely on. And so Google's products help people get from point A to point B using services like Google Maps. We help small businesses reach their customers. We help doctors deliver care to patients. And we help families see and hear each other no matter where in the world we live. Data centers are behind the technology that helps every organization find their people, operate their business, and function in our modern economy. And this economy is growing. So in a recent study, the US Department of Commerce found that the digital economy accounted for over 10% of US GDP and employed nearly 8 million people in this country. Data centers are a critical component of that system and an enabler of its growth and its benefits. So this is a summary of Google's footprint. This is both our data centers, which account for the vast majority of our electricity usage, as well as our office footprint around the globe. And so you can see that we consumed 25 terawatt hours of electricity in 2023. That's as much as small states, as well as small to mid-size electric companies. And so this is a very large footprint. It's also growing. How much of the demand forecasts that we are hearing about are real? That is a really big question that, the grid planners that we were talking about on the last panel, and I know Craig is really deeply thinking about this as well. That's kind of the existential question that we have right now as an electric system. And, I can say that we don't know what the real demand forecast is, but we do know that you can't add up the requests that are being put into every single utility system and get the final amount. There's a lot of duplication going on in requests. And frankly, there's a lot of speculation. As people have seen the promise of AI, there have been the origination of new business models designed to help to bring that to the grid. And so I think we're going to see a lot more clarity in the next 12 months or so about how much of that demand is real. So I encourage practitioners in the audience, researchers, to think, yes, this is growing. This is a big challenge. But the sky is not necessarily falling. And what we need to do is we need to develop the right tools that help to incent our industry to be really clear about what the demands are and to take on some of the risks associated with those demand forecasts that they're putting out there. So on a more optimistic note, I want to talk a little bit about our approach to clean energy. And I'm excited to have both TerraPower and Fervo joining on this panel today because they are two innovators in the industry that are really looking to bring forward those new types of clean energy technologies that we need to complement the wind and solar that we have today. So Google has long been a leading company in the clean energy space. In 2010, we signed our first power purchase agreement. So we were already at that point a carbon neutral company. We had purchased high quality offsets to offset all of the emissions associated with the company's operations. But we felt like it was a little bit too removed from our actual footprint. And we wanted to get involved in bringing forward renewable energy to the grid, which in 2010 was still a really relatively nascent technology. So in 2010, we signed our first PPA for a small wind farm in Iowa. We did that direct to the market, and we put that on the market in SPP, one of those many intersecting maps that you all saw in the last panel. And so building on that success, we saw a lot of promise, and we felt like it was possible for us to become 100% renewable. In 2017, we achieved that goal. We were the first company of our size to do so. But when you are 100% renewable energy, if you're a company that makes that claim, what that means is that you match purchases on an annual basis through something called a renewable energy credit with your operations on an annual basis. And that's somewhat divorced with the actual operation of the electric grid, though it is helpful, right? So company purchases of renewables have helped to accelerate wind and solar down the cost curve. We've helped to drive gigawatts and gigawatts of deployment of these technologies. But Google as a company, after reaching that milestone in 2017, we wanted to think about how we could be more direct in how we were influencing the energy system associated with our own footprint. And so we adopted a new goal, which is 24/7 carbon-free energy. And so what that means is rather than looking at renewable energy credits on an annual matching basis, we're actually looking to schedule every hour of every day in the same grid in which we operate clean energy to match our operations. It's a much larger challenge, and I'll get into some of the ways in which it orients us to the market that I think are particularly interesting. We also have a net zero emissions goal. And so that is the exercise of going beyond just our own energy bill, but looking at the impacts of our suppliers. So the factories overseas that are building Android phones, what are their carbon footprints and how can we ensure that we go fully through the supply chain and make sure that we're accounting for all those emissions along the way. So here's what we've done in the renewable energy space. This is a temporal slide. And so it shows you over time what Google's been investing in since that first PPA in 2010. So first we bought a lot of wind in the middle of the country where there's ample wind resources. Then we started to buy some solar in Texas and the Southeast. And recently we've started to add other technologies like storage. So the vast majority of this procurement has happened direct to wholesale market. So in the West, we do not have a wholesale energy market. And you see there's very little deployment of renewables on this map in the West. In the West, we have no regional transmission organization. We have vertically integrated utilities that operate, and this is much of the discussion earlier today as well, in their own kind of ecosystems to make supply meet demand. In total, through these agreements, we've signed over 15 gigawatts, and Google expects to spend $16 billion under what we've signed to date through 2040. And all of that was done outside of the ways that utilities fundamentally plan and operate their system. And so this is where 24/7 comes in. This is a map of, it's a very stylistic map. Sorry to the academics in the room. We have graphic designers who develop these slides for us. There is never any label on the y-axis in anything that you will see from us. And so the bottom here is intended to represent a base load data center. So this is our Iowa data center facility. The gray rectangle shows that it operates pretty much at full bore around the clock throughout the year. And then the green represents the wind that we've put on that same grid on the MISO grid to support the Iowa data center. And this is a 100% renewable energy facility. It is still very reliant on the fossil-based resources on the grid in Iowa. In fact, there's a coal plant down the road from our Iowa facility. And even though we're 100% renewable, it has not gone offline. And so when we think about 100% renewable energy and we think about 24/7, I think this picture really summarizes why it's important for corporates like ourselves. And we're trying to lead the charge to bring others along, right? It makes sense for Google to be at the forefront of pulling in this direction because we have significant resources and staffing with which to do so. But it's important that we encourage the broader landscape to start to think more integrated into how the system actually operates. It's important also because of where we are in the decarbonization curve. So wind and solar are now the lowest marginal cost resources. And so our utilities, through least cost planning, are able to support those technologies on their own. So what's the role of a green focused customer and how can we orient people to be most helpful? This is a summary of where we are across our global footprint. And so the first was a temporal picture of the challenge of 24/7. This is a locational picture. So remember, we are intending to meet this goal in every market in which we operate. And you can see that our current results are mixed. So in Oregon, that was our first hyperscale facility. It sits on the banks of the Columbia River and it benefits from the federal hydro system. That facility operates at 89% hourly matched carbon-free energy already, just by virtue of where it sits in the system. Contrast that with Singapore, which is a small small island nation, limited land availability, we're only 4% of our way towards our goal in Singapore. And so what this means is that we need to start thinking about complementary technologies. We need to start working a little bit harder, and we need to solve this problem in every single market across the globe. And these dots are growing in real time. So our teams are looking at new geographies, new markets, new countries, new continents at all times. So the challenge is very significant. And so the work that I've been doing over the last 2 years is thinking about how we can create the structures that kind of solve a part of this puzzle. How can we create a structure that enables us to take Google's demand for clean energy and our ambition to be hourly matched with clean energy by 2030? And how can we make that work better within the reality of how our utilities plan for and operate their system? And this is even more important to the notes about energy demand. So how can we make sure that we can achieve the economic development potential associated with the growth of AI, ML? How can we grow our digital economy and not sacrifice our clean energy goals? And so when we look at our pathway to reach 24/7, we run what's a very simplistic linear optimization model that looks a little bit like a utility integrated resource plan, but I want to emphasize that it's much more simple. It's not an actual dispatch model or anything. But we give the model every year, it's 2030, we need to meet 24/7 everywhere we operate. Here are the available technologies. Here is what all the costs are of these technologies. Optimize on a lease, take into account what's already on the grid and what's expected to be on the grid. That's fundamental to 24/7 as well, is we want to make sure we're complementing what's there and not just trying to replace it over and over again. And so when we run that model, we do it with 2 scenarios. In the first scenario, we only let it choose scaled resources. So that's wind, solar, and 4-hour battery storage. And in the second run, we give it access to new technologies, things like enhanced geothermal, advanced nuclear, long duration energy storage, carbon capture and storage, and hydrogen. And we find that even at current pricing estimates, Google would see a 40% reduction in our cost to reach 24/7, as well as a 40% reduction in the total megawatts needed when we give the model access to that new technology. And so for us, that makes a very clear case that we need to start the work now to be advancing those new types of clean technologies, and that doing so will help to drive those down the cost curve is our theory, which should make the cost of decarbonization more efficient and less costly for everyone. And so we also need to make sure that we're aligning various capital streams, various resources that we have available to meet this challenge. And so we need to work to align customer demand. We need to leverage federal policy and IRA dollars, and we need to work together with our utilities to be able to drive those innovations to be most successful. And then lastly, and I spent the majority of my career in and around public utility commissions and utility rates and regulations. And so we looked across the industry and we looked at existing green tariff programs, existing customer programs, and we found that really there was not a model out there that would enable us to support this technological innovation. And so we needed to start from scratch and work on something new. So in June of this year, we announced the development of what we call the Clean Transition Tariff. This is one tool in our toolkit to accelerate deployment of new technologies. This is one tool in our toolkit to help us to meet growing demands with clean energy. And so we worked with partners across the US, we worked with a number of utilities, we worked with a number of technology providers, and we wanted to think about creating a new type of customer program that was fundamentally different in 3 ways. And so typically customers have focused on clean energy, and even we call our own goal carbon-free energy. But when you think about 24/7, for the energy nerds in the room, it's a capacity goal. It's not an energy goal. And so capacity is not the volume that the resource produces, but rather it is the ability of the resource to provide at the time that it's needed most. So the ability to fill in those gray gaps in that chart that we saw with the Iowa site. And so we want to shift that focus to clean capacity. We want to incorporate directly into utility resource planning. In some of our conversations that we've had over the last several years, if we didn't look at what was already going on the grid, and we really looked only at our footprint, which a lot of corporate accounting tells us to do. They tell us you can't take credit for anything that you didn't do, so you need to go and solve your whole problem for yourself over here on an island. But we actually found that if we were doing that, it was sending us the wrong signal. So for example, in the desert Southwest, If we looked at that analysis, it would tell us to build more solar because solar is cheaper. But there's a lot of solar already on the grid in the desert Southwest. And so we needed to find a way to better incorporate what we were doing into how our utilities were planning and operating their system. And then in order for us to be able to do this, we need to start to work directly with our utilities. We need to complement the work that we do directly executing power purchase agreements at the wholesale market level for scaled resources with collaboration with our utilities to be able to unlock that full power value through our electric bill. And so our theory is our primary relationship with our utilities, like at my home, is through my electric bill. And so there's a huge opportunity to leverage that as a resource in aligning the incentives to be able to put ourselves out there a little further with these newer and costlier technologies. So the announcement that we made in June was for ESA, an energy supply agreement with our partner NV Energy. We have a long history of working with NV Energy. We had a really big flagship procurement with us. That was like the one little dot in Nevada on that chart. Where we put forward in 2019 a huge amount of battery storage and solar, which at the time was the largest corporate procurement of battery storage back in 2019. Now we're seeing that deployed at scale elsewhere. But building off of the success of that partnership, we collaborated with NV Energy to design and file for approval a new type of rate structure, which is called the CTT. And then that enabled us to work with Ben's team, and you'll hear more from Ben about his technology, to bring forward this clean, firm, enhanced geothermal to the grid in Nevada. And I hope that Ben will talk about this, but it brings us from a very small pilot scale to a commercial size development. So 115 megawatts of geothermal will go onto the grid in Nevada in 2030. That will support diversification of the resources on that grid. It will lower gas cost exposure for other customers. And we are ensuring through every which way you look at it under that arrangement that Google is fully bearing any cost premium associated with that. It also gets NV Energy's utility planners more comfortable with those resources. It helps them to integrate that into their system. This is a financial sleeve. It's not a physical sleeve. So we're bearing the costs of bringing that forward as one of NV Energy's many ratepayers, but NV Energy system planners will need to operate, dispatch, and handle that facility when it comes online. And then we're also talking about this with a number of utilities across the country. We're talking about advanced nuclear under this model. We're talking about long duration energy storage. We're even talking about weatherization of homes in local communities. Like, what is the all hands on deck kind of strategy that we can use to bring forward clean capacity? And so that's all that I have for you, and looking forward to hearing from the rest of the speakers. Thank you.